Good morning and welcome to Mass Memorial Virtual Sunday School, Sunday, September 1st, 2024. Theme for the quarter, Worship in the Covenant Community. Unit 1, Leaders Set Worship Examples. Lesson title, Marking Transition. Genesis 13, 8 through 18, King James Version. Our key verse, Abraham removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. Genesis 13:18, King James Version. The aim for our lesson today, explain the context of Abraham's worship regarding altars, desire the spiritual maturity that develops through acknowledging God's activity in our lives, and practice, a worshipful response in recognition of God's presence and activity in the threshold moments in our lives. Lesson background. The book of Genesis. It is the first book of the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Old Testament. It provides us with an account of the creation of the world and an early history of mankind. Genesis also let us see God as both the creator and the provider for mankind. The author of Genesis is believed to be an anonymous writer, but the actual credit for this book and the first 5 books of the Jewish Pentateuch and the Christian Old Testament have been credited to Moses. There are some key words that we'll see throughout our lesson, and that is the word herdsman, keepers of a herd, which are usually cattle or sheep, and they are responsible for guiding them to a fertile land, making sure they have water, and to protect them from wild animals, robbers, and other herders. Another word that we'll see that's important for our lesson is the word seed. For the purpose of this lesson, it means offspring or descendants. And as we get into our lesson, we'll also see how it means posterity. Abram or Abraham, considered the Hebrew father of Abrahamic religions, including Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Abraham also is considered the father of faith. Other words in our lesson are Lot. Lot was the son of Haran, Abraham's brother. So Lot was Abraham's nephew. And he had followed Abraham out of Egypt during the plague. In our lesson, we'll see how Lot made his decision without considering Abraham's needs. The city of Sodom is another word that's prevalent in our lesson that we have heard about in the Old Testament. Lot chose the fertile land of the city of Sodom, which is in the Jordan River Valley. Sodom was considered a very weak city and was sinning against God. Lot and his family, as we get further down, was warned to leave Sodom and not look back. And so before God destroyed Sodom, he warned Lot and his wife. And we know the story. When they got ready to leave, his wife looked back and was turned to a pillar of salt. Other important words in our lesson, promise to Abraham. This promise is found in Genesis 13, 14 through 17, in which he promised Abraham and his offspring land as far as the eye could see, and promised him that his offspring or seed would be as the dust of the earth. And when God instructed Abraham to leave his homeland, he told him to journey to the land of Canaan. And he found many obstacles on his journey, but he never lost faith. And this is one reason God kept his promise to Abraham. The plain of Mamre at Hebron, this is where Abraham settled and eventually died. It is believed to be a part of present-day Iraq. And it actually, the most ancient city being Ramoth at Khalil, which still exists today in northern Hebron. And so Mamre is where he pitched his tent and also set up an altar to God. Our lesson scriptures, I've entitled this first set, A Shrewd or Prudent Proposal, or Showing Good Judgment. Excuse me. Genesis 13:8 and 9. I'll read Genesis 13:8. And Abram said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we are brethren. Genesis 13:9. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. If thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. These are two very important verses. And these verses tell us that there was a growing conflict between the herdsmen of Lot and the herdsmen of Abram because of insufficient pasture. And the other reason was that other groups occupied the land, and they were there first, so there was not enough grazing land for both Lot and Abram's flocks. So Abram gave Lot a choice. But he also considered the fact that he did not want to make him an enemy. He did not want it to fall out over something as simple as a piece of land. And so Abraham stepped back and he called him brethren, which meant that he wanted to make this a peaceful settlement. And we know that in today's world, many families have broken up over land assignments, property assignments, or something that was going to be left to pass down. But Abraham did not want this. So Abraham's solution to the overcrowding is that he told Lot, you pick, you take your choice, and I'll take what's left. And that's what it meant when he said, if you go right, I'll go left, and vice versa. So this is a good example of how this lesson comes into play today, because if we look at what happened a few weeks ago when President Biden stepped aside, it took a lot for him to do that. But he did it for the sake and the good of democracy and for the good of the country. In spite of everything, he did not have to yield, but he removed himself for the good of others. And so in our lesson today, God made Abraham, gave Abraham his promise. And Abraham was not overlooked in God's sight. So it kind of points out that when you do what's right, it kind of pays off in the end. And so that's why this lesson, even though it was written thousands of years ago, is so important in what's going on now, to remove oneself for the sake of the good. Our next, Genesis 3:10 and 3:11. Making a poor choice comes from Genesis 13:10 through 13. I'll read 10 and 11. And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou come into Zoar. Genesis 13:11. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves one from another. This just says that Lot made his choice, and he was looking at the physical attributes of the land, how fertile it was, how beautiful it was. And so this land was located near the city of Sodom, and it doesn't make clear that he knew about the city of Sodom when he moved there, when he took up this property and decided to stay there. So he separated from Abram, and he was happy because it's almost like he figured he got the best of the lot, because he got the most fertile land and the most fertile valley at this particular time. Moving on, Genesis 13 and 12. Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent towards Sodom. Genesis 13:13. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. In verse 12, after Lot has made his choice, then Abraham continued on to the land of Canaan. And as Lot stayed near Sodom, he actually transitioned himself and got involved in the land, even though he was considered a nomad. And so Abraham moved on to Canaan, the land that God had promised him. He also knew that the land of Canaan was occupied by the Canaanites, and it would not be easy to obtain this land. But he still had faith that God would keep his promise and that he would inherit this land. In verse 13, it says that these men of Sodom were sinners. Everything was going on in the city of Sodom: rape, incest, murder, false teaching, and most of all, serving false and idol gods. And if you look at Sodom and Gomorrah, considered one of the most wicked cities in history. And it's not unlike things that are happening today. And we tend to think, if we look at Sodom and Gomorrah, we'll say, well, we're not so bad. But yes, we are. Because all these things are separating us from God and what he would have us to do. So in the long run, Lot did not make a good choice. He did not make a good choice, but it took him a while to realize that. And even though he made a bad choice, God was still in the plan for Lot. Because he warned him before he got ready to destroy the city of Sodom. Our next group is entitled, God Always Keeps His Promises. This comes from Genesis 13, 14 through 18. Genesis 13, 14. And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up thine eyes and look from the place where thou art northward and southward and eastward and westward. Genesis 13, 15. For all the land which thou seest, to thee I will give it, and to thy seed forever. And here the word seed has reference to offspring, heirs, or descendants. And it also means posterity. And what God asked Abraham to do was, he said, as far as your eye can see, this is the land that you will inherit, including the land which Lot owned. He said, this land is promised to you, the Jewish people, and your descendants. And that is an amazing promise of Abraham inheriting all of this land. And he also said your seed would be numbered such that it would be a number that no man can count. And we will see that as we move into our next few verses. God always keeps his promises. Genesis 13, 14 to 18. Genesis 13, 16. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. This was a vastness, because we know that we can't count the grains of sand or the grains of dust on the earth. And so this was the physical inheritance that God had promised Abraham. But this also has reference to a spiritual inheritance, that he would inherit, he would be a part of God's kingdom and its vastness. And so it's just saying that God wanted, when he told Abraham in verse 17, arise, walk through the land, in the length of it and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee. Genesis 13, 18. Then Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. Verse 13 and 17, God instructed Abraham to go out and see what I have given you. Absorb the breadth and the length of what you have inherited. He wanted him to be able to feel the promise, to see the promise. And so it's much like if we inherit a 20 or 30,000, $20 or $30 million estate. We would want time to appreciate, to see it, and behold the vastness of it. So that's basically what God instructed Abraham to do, is to go out and see what I have given thee. And so this was a big promise. And we still know that that promise has been carried out even up until today. Genesis 13:18. Then Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. After Abraham got settled and he moved to Hebron, he built an altar to the Lord. This is an important lesson in our world today, because it just shows what God can do. The promises that God keeps and gives to us. And he wants us to enjoy what he has given us, but he also wants us to be faithful to him. And because Abraham was faithful in everything he did, God promised him this land of Canaan, and he was able to receive it. Let's look at some practical applications in this lesson. The book of Genesis, even though it was written thousands of years ago, its message could not be more front and center for us as we look at what's going on in our political arena. The herdsmen of Lot and Abraham were in a dispute over grazing. But Abraham took the high road, as we could remind ourselves. He did not want to bring friction in his family. He wanted to do something to keep the peace. And so in order to keep the peace, he said, I'll let you choose what you want. And so this lesson teaches us that we should learn to seek peaceful solutions, listen intently, and find a common ground, whether it be at church, work, our families, or our communities. That we should seek the peace no matter what we're endeavoring to do. And in today's world, it's all about me and my choice. And we can be very inconsiderate of others. This lesson lets us know these are dangerous times, and making a bad choice can be very damaging, not just to ourselves, but to others. And we know this because had Lot probably known about Sodom, he might not have chosen this land. But it appears that he did not know about it, and the fact he was looking at how fertile the land was led him to take this particular spot. So we know that Abraham did not suffer because of his decision to let Lot choose first, because God kept his promise to Abraham. As we go forth, please allow God to guide us in our every task and show who you are to others with love and kindness. Remember, we don't always have to be in charge, or we don't always have to go first. So on that note, I hope you have gotten something from this lesson and it has been helpful. And I ask that you continue to support us in our virtual presentations. Thank you.